guys, I'm Kimberly from Fat Quarter Shop, and today is May 3rd, 2024, and I am actually today at the H&H show in Chicago. So this is pre-recorded, but that's okay. It's still gonna have all the info you need, and we can answer all the questions you have. We're working on our charity quilt, and we're on the third block. I'm gonna show you our previous blocks. These are our previous blocks that we've already made. And we have raised $21,000 for Make-A-Wish. And if you would like to donate, we have a link to that. We have raised $21,225. This is our 11th annual charity quilt, and super exciting because Jocelyn is already working on next year's charity quilt. This features Strawberry Lemonade by Sherry and Chelsea. And the quilt was designed by Jocelyn. We still have quilt kits and backing sets available. Now, today we're going to work on the Peace and Plenty quilt. I wanted to talk a little bit about how this is pieced before we start. You're going to make 4 blocks that finish at 15.5 inches, unfinished. So they're going to finish at 15. This block has half square triangles right here, flying geese right here, and hourglass blocks right here. So I would say it's intermediate, but if you can do a half square triangle, a flying geese, and an hourglass, you should be fine. The tip that I have mainly is on fabrics E, D, and I, which are these 2 squares and 4 rectangles on the outside. Cut that bigger by 1/2 inch each way. Just cut everything 1/2 inch bigger all the way around, and I'll show you how to trim that down. And then you're gonna end up with blocks that are exactly 15.5 inches unfinished. So I'm gonna make 1 block today. And in your kit, this should already be printed out for you, but if you're sewing with different fabrics, you just go to the Jolly Jabber blog and download it. We're gonna start with the outside of the block, and you're gonna take a fabric D rectangle, which is right here, 2 fabric I squares, and then we're gonna put these right sides together. Now you're gonna make a total of 8, but for each block you only need 2. So I'm gonna put these right here. We're gonna actually do 2 steps at one time because this is pretty beginner. So basically, I cut these 2.5 inches wide instead of 2 inches wide, and the square's 2.5 inches. I'm gonna put these on my design board, because I think we can do 2 steps at one time, just to make it easy. That's step 1 right here. Step 2 is flying geese. Each block you need 4 flying geese. So I'm gonna make 1, and the other ones are already done. So you're gonna take a fabric G rectangle, 2 fabric C squares. And I did want to point out, when you work with friction pen, if you're working with dark fabric, it's going to leave a white line. So you have to kind of be careful. I'm going to do it on this fabric because it's only going to be on this side, but I would not write on this side with dark fabric because it will leave a line. And it's kind of like a permanent line. So I'm going to put this here, draw a line. Okay, so I've got my lines, and I'm going to put this on this side. And when you're working with flying geese, I'm going to pin. I always pin or glue or something. I mean, I never just wing it, because once you start sewing, this is going to shift. So if you have these pins in, you're going to get a better result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam here, and then I'm going to stitch directly on this line, and then I'm going to keep going. Now the pattern tells you to press different directions. You can do that, or you can press open. I'm pressing open. My units are gonna look like this, and that's kind of my thing now, is just to press open. So you can do it either way. So I have my 1/4 inch foot on my machine, and I'm just gonna stitch with a 1/4 inch seam, cut those apart. Now I'm using RFO color 2600 today. It's like a light gray, just because of the navy. I don't want anything too light. Then I'm gonna switch away from my 1/4 inch foot to an open toe foot. And I'm gonna stitch on that drawn line. Now I'm not gonna remove any of these pins until I'm completely done, because if you move the pins as you're going, your fabric will shift. I'm gonna come back here, trim a 1/4 inch away, and you could then sew this together and keep that as a 1/2 square triangle. It is too small for the block because the block does have a 1/2 square triangle, but this will be too small, but you could save it for something else. We're gonna go to the iron. I'm gonna set my seams, press to one direction. Then I'm gonna press this open. And then I'm gonna leave this on my ironing table with the clapper on it. From here, I'm gonna press this. And you can see how it stayed really nice, and you've got that 45-degree angle, 90-degree angle. Sorry, I don't ever know my angles. I need to go back to geometry class. Okay. So I'm gonna pin. And I know this is like extra steps, but your flying geese will come out really nice. Trim a 1/4 inch away. So on this, you're gonna make 16 total, but 4 for each block. But what I wanted to show you here is before you go on, one thing I do, Creative Grids makes a 3.5 by 6.5 inch rectangle. And if you put this on there, you will see there's this white line right here. Well, actually we can do it the black line. You can probably see better. It's on both sides. One side's black, one side's white. And you can see that black line is right on there. Trim around. And this is exactly 3.5 by 6.5. So that is one extra step that I do because I really want my blocks to come out perfectly. And there's a 3.5 by 6.5 inch rectangle, and then there's like a 2.5 by 3.5 or something like that. Let me see. Yeah, this one, 2.5 by 4.5. So because flying geese are usually 2.5 by 4.5 or 3.5 by 6.5, I usually trim with these. And you can see there's the black lines here, and the other side there's white lines. So depending on what fabric you're using, the lines will show up one way or the other. So we've got 4 flying geese. Now we're gonna make 1/2 square triangles. I'm gonna show you the traditional way. Of course, you can use triangle paper, which would go a lot faster. You're gonna take your fabric B and your fabric F, put them right sides together, We're going to trim this down, so I'm not going to pin because we're going to trim down. It doesn't have to be exact, if that makes sense. It gives you a little bit more room. So I'm just using this seam guide by Creative Grids. And what that does is it gives me a 1/4 inch away from the center on each side. So I'm going to stitch on these drawn lines. Using that same open toe foot. This is the same thing. You're going to make 16 for each block. You're going to make 16 total, 4 for each block. So I'm going to show you how to take these and trim them down. I'm going to press open. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to trim your block down. So this you need to trim to 3.5. So you can take a 3.5 inch square ruler. I'm using the Creative Grids. You put the line on the ruler, that black line on the line of your seam, and you trim around. So this is one way you can do it. But if you don't want to have to buy all of these square rulers, and you only want to buy one ruler, you can buy the 6.5, because that's the best. If you only want to have one ruler, I would buy the 6.5. And what you would do is you would put that diagonal line on there. Make sure that your 3.5, you're going to have room to cut. You're going to trim 2 sides off. Turn it around, and then place your 3.5 line here and 3.5 line here. So if you're on a budget and you still want to be able to trim squares down, just buy a 6.5 inch. I mean, I guess you could buy a 7.5, but I would go with a 6.5. You need 4 for each block, 16 total. Now we're going to make hourglass units. And for these, this is how I always make them. We're going to be trimming these down, and I'll also show you how to trim that down. So you're going to take your fabric H triangles and your fabric A triangles, and they're going to look like that. And then the way that I'm going to assemble the block is I'm going to put these 2 right sides together, pin right here at the end, put these right sides together, pin, and then I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam down here, and I'm going to leave this chain together, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch foot. Okay, I'm gonna set my seams, press to one side, press open, I'm gonna cut this apart, because if you don't cut it apart now, when you sew the next seam and try to press open, it won't press open with that string there, or that thread there. From here, I'm going to put these right sides together, and I'm going to line them up where everything lines up right in that center. Pin here, And then I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam down the edge of this. Keep the pin in until you get right to it. Now what I would do before I trim this down if I was at home is I would definitely let the clapper sit on this, because these are bias edges, and just to get it nice and flat before you trim it down is what I would do at home. And now we need to trim this down to 3.5 inches square. So there's 2 ways you can do it. I'm going to show you the hard way. But if you want to trim it down with a 3.5 inch square ruler, you just take the 3.5 inch square ruler. It has a circle dot in the center of it. You want that dot to hit here, and you want all your points to hit the corner of the ruler. But if you don't have that ruler, I'm going to show you how you can do it. 3.5 divided by 2 is 1.75. So you take, if you just have one ruler, you take it. 1.75 is where you would need, which is right there, 1.75, you would need that to touch the center. So you'd have to be a little bit more careful with this. Okay, so what you have to do is your 1.75 needs to hit right there and there. And then this needs to hit here. 3.5 needs to hit here and here and here. Just make sure your math is right. Turn it around, measure 3.5. And it's going to come out just as nice as if you did the 3.5 inch square. You can still do it with a bigger square. It just will take a little bit more time with that. So you're going to need 16 of these total, 4 for each block. And then this is what we're going to have so far for each block. 2, 4, 4, 4. Okay, so then we're going to put it into units. So we're going to go to page 3. We're going to put our flying geese this way, our hourglass this way, and our half square triangle this way. And the main thing you want to do is you want to make sure your navy is this way, your navy, and your navy. And here I'm going to pin. And this one has a lot of points, and this is why when you see it, you're going to know why I pressed open. When you put this together right here, you just want to make sure you've got everything where the navy and the navy touch, and you're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. You should have a point right there. And then I would still compare, make sure it's right. Okay, here. This is why I'm pressing open, because I don't want to bulk here or here. And I'm going to do the poke-a-pin method. So I'm going to put these right sides together, pin on one side. And pinning is your friend in this block. I know some people don't like to pin, but I just don't know how you could do this block without pinning. Now I'm going to poke the pin, the tip of the pin, right in that point. I'm going to look over here to make sure it's right in the point on this side. Then I'm going to put the point in this point right on the tip. Remove the pin and put it back in, and then sew with a 1/4 inch seam. And your point should match up. Set your seam. So magically, Teresa made these for me. And I'm going to just really compare my red, my red, my red, my red, my red, my red. That's the easiest. And then I kind of just trace to make sure it matches. I'm going to put these two right sides together, and we're going to do a lot of poke a pin. These two right sides together. And then I'm going to pin right here, making sure that touches. Right here, I need to poke the pin. So I need to poke my pin through that point and that point. And then just let your pin go straight up and down, remove it, and then repin. Pin at this end. The same thing, you're going to have to make sure those touch. This one's going to be kind of tricky. We'll see if we get this one. So let me know if you're pinning open or you're pressing open, or if you are pressing to one side. Since this one you make 4 blocks, you could just do like 2 one way and 2 the other and see what you like better. Now this one, you can see it's a little bit off, and that's okay. Just poke where those the points are, and it'll line up. And then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away. And we'll see how these points came out. And you can see, even though I pressed open, see that little bump? It's just a lot of seams right there. I'm going to press the front just to make sure everything's flat. Okay, so I need to cut this apart, and I'm going to pin, and we're going to basically have to poke a pin at this intersection, and this intersection. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can just pin and see how it comes out. It's totally up to you. If, you know, some people care if it's like exact, some people don't. Totally up to you. This is just what I've done forever. So make sure those line up. And then here, you're going to put the pin. Now, when I put it through the back, I'm going to check it on the front just to make sure it really goes through where the point is on the front, because you want it to go right in that point. You could eyeball it, I guess, and just line up the points. I don't know if my eyesight is good enough for that at this age. And then I'm going to sew across, and again, I just pull the pin right when I get to it. Sometimes you'll see my finger doing this. You want to be careful you don't sew over your finger, but I do that to smash my seam down before it gets under the foot. Just, you have to be careful. And we're gonna see if my seams came out correct. Yay, they did! So I'm gonna finger press the back. And right there, my seam went this way. So I'm going to show you what to do to fix it. You don't have to fix it, but I'm going to just pull stitches out right there. Flatten it. And then go back over that seam flat. Just make sure you cover your previous stitches. So it looks good on the front and the back. This one's probably the hardest block in the entire series. Now the next step, we're going to be adding and trimming down. But even though we're doing that, I still am going to trim right here just to get it really nice and straight. Totally not necessary. Extra step, totally not needed, but it is something I do because I just don't want to have a lot of threads. So really my goal is just cut the edge, get any excess thread off, especially when you're working with something with a dark background. And right here, when I lined it up at the corner, and my 1/4 inch on my ruler hit that seam. So really you should just be getting a little bit off, but if you have some extra stuff. Okay, so from here we're gonna add E to the left and the right, and to be honest, it doesn't matter. You can rotate it any way, it doesn't matter. Now, like I said, these were originally cut at, I'm gonna just make sure, these were originally cut 2 inches wide. I cut them 2.5, and I cut them longer. That's because what I can do now, I'm just gonna put this here. And I'm just gonna overhang that. And I'm just gonna lay it flat and just pin across. Now, because I trimmed this up, if anything was off on those 1/4 inch seams, I've fixed it. And if something maybe is short, like if you have a short seam, you could put a little pin and kind of maneuver, make it work. Now here I'm just gonna sew with a 1/4 inch seam and press, and I am gonna still press open. That's totally up to you. You could just press to one side. Now here I am gonna sew fast because if I have pinned correctly and done my seams correctly, it will work. On the back, I have that little thing right there. Sorry, thanks. And then I'm just gonna unstitch these, stitch back over it. And that's usually gonna happen with this many seams. So when you look at it, this one's exact and this one's a little bit off. But in the big scheme of things, nobody's gonna notice. So I'm gonna press this open. Now see where I fixed that seam? I'm gonna pop that just so that it doesn't pull. I'm gonna also press on the top just to get it flat. I'm gonna write myself a note real quick. Okay, so from here, I'm going to trim these right here, just to get flat. So from here, we're gonna add these at the top, and you're gonna put a white square at the top, right, bottom, left. And when you do that, I'm just making sure I have it correct. When you do that, it's gonna hang off here, and that's what you want. So I'm gonna put this together, pin, so you guys will have to let me know if you have tried my method where you make everything just a tiny bit bigger and trim down. Some people, you know, it's interesting because sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It kind of depends what kind of mood I'm in or how much time I have. You know, if I'm not going to be able to finish something in one setting, I might just cut it the exact way because when I come back, I might not remember where I was at. So it kind of depends. So pin those first. Just get everything nice and flat. Ow, I just poked myself. And then you're gonna sew with a 1/4 inch seam. pin just popped in there. So hopefully we're all done, except for trimming. So I'm going to press these open. Okay, so this is supposed to be 15.5 inches unfinished. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 15.5 divided by 2, and that's 7.75. From the center, I need to measure over 7.75, 7.75, because I don't have a 15.5 inch square ruler. But I do have this 8.5 inch. So my number is 7.75, and it should be half an inch or quarter inch off. So I put that 7.75 right on the line and cut. I'm going to turn 7.75, and I did write it down, and the reason I write it down is so I don't make a mistake. Now I'm going to line this up here, 7.75 plus, let me get on my tippy toes, sorry. I need to line that up. So I've got the top lined up and the 7.75. Now here, if you wanted to, you could do 15.5 this way, just to make sure it's exact, but I'm gonna just do this, 7.75. You could also use a square ruler, but I don't think there is a 15.5 inch square ruler. And if there is, I don't think you need to buy one. And then when you put this on your mat, it should measure 15.5, so it does. So I'm gonna show you all the blocks. This is called the Peace and Plenty block. So I'm going to show you the blocks that me and Teresa made, and then I'm going to show you sample maker blocks. And then when you're putting this into your quilt, you will need to pay attention to where your white squares are. Of course, if you make a mistake, nobody else except you would know, but just, you know, keep that in mind. So Block 3, Peace and Plenty. This is from the Moonbeams Quilt Kit using the Strawberry Lemonade fabric, and we have reprinted this navy. It's either in stock or should be in stock any day. We also reprinted the white on white and the really fun panel. So those are either online or on their way. The next collection to show you is Antoinette by French General. Anne from customer service made these, and she used French General Favorites background color 21. This is Flower Girl by My So Quilty Life. Nova from the It's So Emma team made this one, and she used color 182 of Bella Solids for the background. This is Honey Bloom by Three Sisters. Angel from the It's So Emma team made this one, and she used color 200 from Bella here. And this is Ridgewood collection by Minnick and Simpson, and Shelly from customer service made this, and this is a print from the Ridgewood collection. Now, one thing I wanted to point out to you, I'm gonna show this one too. You can really see the difference in, I'm just gonna show two. You can really see the difference here between a dark background and a light background, and the prints being inverse, etc. One thing I wanted to print out is if you were using scraps, for example, you could use a fabric here, a fabric here, a fabric here, and a fabric here. You could change these up. You could make this scrappy, meaning you didn't have to just use a pink, a yellow, a cornerstone, and a background. You could make it really scrappy. There's lots of options. So I hope you have joined along with me. Our next tutorial on Moonbeams will be Friday, June 7th. I'd love for you to share all of your blogs on social media. I hope all of you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Bye.